Welcome to the CareFinity Administration Training Session. My name is Shauna and I'm going to take you through the training today. The first thing that we want to double check is that you have the administration option on your left-hand toolbar here in CareFinity. This indicates that you are logged in as an administrator with administration privileges and will have all the options available to you in your application that we're going to review in the session today. If you do not have this menu and believe that you should, please contact your in-house local CareFinity administrator at your organization to have them take a look at your role that is assigned within the CareFinity application. It can be easily adjusted if the inappropriate role is applied and needs to be changed or updated in any way. When we open the administration menu, you're going to see a variety of options listed down the left-hand side. These are the options that we are going to review today and go through in our session, reviewing these different menu options and explaining some of the configurations that are present. We're not going to review all the options in every menu simply because your system comes predefined by your CareFinity implementation engineer, meaning a lot of these options are already preset for you and have meaning within the application. You're going to see paths and different technology options filled out in these fields that we don't want to edit, as that might affect the way that your application operates. So what we're going to do today in the administration session is highlight the options that you can edit and review as a clinic administrator within your practice. So today, let's first go into our first option on the left-hand side, Manage Practice Config. And feel free to follow along in your application as we go through these different options. And you can compare and contrast the settings that I have to what's filled out for your organization and so forth. When we get into the Manage Practice Config option, we can kind of see that our screen is divided into different sections. You have application features, you have general settings, documents and images, and if you notice, I have a scroll bar where I can scroll down and continue to see more options. So diving into the first section, let's look at our application features. The application feature section controls the menu options that you have or that your end users have available to them on the left-hand navigation. Everything that we're going to configure here is at the practice level. So the very first thing, if you have multiple practices, the very first thing you would want to do is pick your practice that you want to adjust or update settings for. If you only have one practice, that's going to default in there for you, and you would not need to make any changes at the practice level. Now, again, everything that we review under administration is going to be applied at the practice level. And then you have the opportunity when we get into the roles to update the user privileges at the role level and become a little bit more granular user to user if you would like. So just keep in mind everything that we're updating in Manage Practice Config is going to be at the practice level, and that would be applied for the practice that you have chosen at the top. So the application features controls at the practice level the options that you have under the patient record in the left-hand toolbar. Now, one thing that I do want to highlight as we begin the training and going through the training is that you may not see the exact same options on your toolbar or in your application features that I have displayed here in the training. And the reason why that is we have three flavors of CareFinity. We have CareFinity Archive, CareFinity Live Archive, and CareFinity Downtime. So depending on your application, you may have slightly different options. Do not let that alarm you. That's by design. And the options that you have are deployed to your organization for the flavor of CareFinity that you have installed. When you're looking at application features, you have a great hover help option for each of the checkboxes. The check, if it's checked in blue, it indicates that that option is enabled for your practice. Unchecked, disabled for your practice would not show on that left-hand toolbar. And then the hover help's really great to give you additional information. I might also make a quick plug for our CareFinity end user guide here. The CareFinity End User Guide goes through all of these menus in more detail than I'm probably going to go through them in today's session, and gives you some written explanation for these items as well. So it's a great companion and a great resource if you don't want to get a training video and have to try to find where we talked about that. The training guide can be a great option in your day-to-day if you'd like to review any of the fields and understand more about what they control in the application. So application features, high level, controlling what you see on the patient toolbar on the left-hand side. So going back into Manage Practice Config, if we go down to the next section, let's take a look at our general settings, and we're going to specifically look at the patient default page. The patient default page is where you're allowed to set a practice level default to either open the dashboard or the patient timeline. So to illustrate this to you, you have an option for each patient for the patient dashboard or the patient timeline. The patient timeline is a new feature that you just received with your most recent CareFinity upgrade, or if you're new to CareFinity, this is an alternate option as your landing page when you open a patient record in CareFinity. The dashboard is the traditional default, but you can have the option at the practice level to default the patient record to open to the patient timeline if you would like, and that's where that's controlled is in Manage Practice Config, in the General Settings, Patient Default Page. If you elect to change this and make a change, you adjust the field as you would like, scroll to the bottom of the page, and be sure and save your practice configuration. This is very important that we save our practice configuration because that is what's going to save your changes. If I just click to something else, my changes may not be saved and not rolled out to the remainder of the end users. I'm going to put this back to the dashboard so that mine stays the same as it's been. Documents and images, we really don't want to make a lot of changes in this area or tinker with these paths because these are set, as I mentioned before, by your implementation engineer, and they're pointed to the system location of where these files are stored. So if these paths are edited, it could actually cause some problems within the application. So we'd certainly want to steer clear of making any changes to any of these file paths that are already set up and working well for your organization. I'm going to keep scrolling down to the next couple of sections, and we're going to look at financial settings next. If your source EHR stores the insurance card and EOB images unencrypted and we're able to obtain those, you can elect to enable these two settings, view insurance card and view EOB image. A lot of EHRs store this information encrypted. NextGen is a perfect example. Obviously, everybody that's using CareFinity is not on NextGen, but just to give you one EHR example, this information is encrypted in NextGen, so we're not able to turn these on. But if you're on a different source EHR or you would like to learn more about that, you're welcome to reach out to your CareFinity implementation engineer, and we'd be happy to review that with you and confirm if that's something that you can turn on for your organization. Document header settings is the next section that we're going to take a peek at. Document header settings. We have quite a few options here in this area of the application. And what this section of the configuration allows you to do is add a header to your documents that are stored in CareFinity. So sometimes we run into the situation where the source EHR stores the documents with the header that you see in the application as a part of the document. We have other EHRs that header is not stored as a part of the document. It's simply through the application displayed to you when you preview it on the patient record, but it's not actually stored as a part of the document in the database. So when those documents are copied into CareFinity, we don't have that header that you see in the application. So if you have a need to add a header to your CareFinity documents, you can do it in this section. You can pick and choose the options that you would like to save in that header. And then you can even adjust the location of the header by adjusting these parameters to move it left to right or up or down if you're trying to put it into a specific location on the document stored in CareFinity. So very situational if you might need that information, but you have the opportunity to put that on your document if it might be needed. Now, very similar when we come down and we look at the notes section, very similar to add a CareFinity header to your CareFinity generated note documents. So this section would be for the notes that you create in CareFinity. They're stored in CareFinity, and if you have it enabled, they might push back into your source EHR once connectivity is restored. If you're using that functionality of CareFinity and would like to add a header to those notes, you can do that by completing this section. And again, the same thing applies with the location of the header or just choosing any of the options that you might like to enable to be in that header. Again, checked is enabled and unchecked would be disabled and not present on that header if you choose to enable that function. So again, if you come through this section of the application and you choose to make any changes, be sure and click that Save Practice Configuration button at the bottom of the screen, as that's going to save the changes that you've made. Once you make changes, they are immediately available to end users upon their next login. So for you, if you're logged in making these changes, note the information at the top of the screen. A user must log out and log back in for practice config changes to take effect. So you've saved your changes. What we want to do now is come up to the top right-hand corner, click the logout button, log back in, and open a patient record and test out the changes that you've made in CareFinity. Same for any users. If there happens to be 5, 8, 10, 20, 50 users in CareFinity when you make those changes, they will have to log out and log back in to see those changes. Otherwise, they will continue to work on the previous configuration until they complete a log out and log back in. So that wraps up the Manage Practice Config section and the items that we would like to review with you in that section today. Now let's take a little peek at the next section, Manage Global Settings. So I'm just going to click to Manage Global Settings, and you're going to see the screen change in the new options display. Manage Global Settings has two menu options, Menu Item Alias and Patient Demographic that you see here in the dropdown. Menu Item Alias allows you as the practice administrator to change the labels of key areas of the CareFinity application. So what I mean by that is if I go into the patient record, you can see here in Menu Item Alias, I've already set one up for the training today. Out of the box, a particular setting in CareFinity is labeled Problems. But let's say Problems doesn't make sense for my organization. We're more comfortable calling those items Diagnosis. I have put in a menu item alias here or configured a menu item alias in CareFinity so that I will not see problems and I will see the label diagnosis within the application. So where I'm going to see that change is in three different areas. When I go to the dashboard, you see that I see diagnosis here. I do not see the word problems. That's because I added that menu item alias. Also in the timeline, down the left-hand side, you're going to see that I see diagnosis. I don't see problem because, again, I overrode problem with the word diagnosis. And then finally, in the left-hand navigation, you're going to see diagnosis instead of problem. So that's the three areas, the dashboard, the timeline, and the left-hand navigation is where you're going to see those menu item aliases appear within your application. You can add as many of these as you would like to. If I want to create a setting, I just simply click the Create Setting button. I'm going to first choose the setting that I would like to change. They are predefined, so you do want to pick one from the list. Let's say allergies. I prefer for that to say allergen. I could simply save that, and now throughout the application, I'm going to see that different value that I've defined here in the configuration. If down the road I don't like that, or people come back to me and they're like, I don't really love that change you made, simply take it away and we'll reset back to allergy. The second item that we have here is patient demographic. Patient demographic is where your implementation engineer configures the header of CareFinity. So it has a lot to do with this section here at the top of your CareFinity application. Specifically, these fields here are defined in that area of the application. There's really nothing for clinics to edit in this patient demographic menu. And if you open yours and it's blank, that's perfectly fine. There does not have to be anything configured there. It simply means that you're using CareFinity out of the box. Anything that's configured here is more or less an override. So nothing to change here. And if you feel like you might want to change, I would highly recommend reaching out to your implementation engineer to learn more about how these settings affect your application. The next area we're going to move to is manage roles. When we talk about user access, we're talking about primarily two areas of the application. We're going to look at manage roles and we're going to look at manage users. So we're going to first talk about manage roles, which is a little bit higher level than the manage users. So when we first came into the discussion today in administration, we were talking about practice level configuration in the manage practice config. But now we've configured the practice, and now we want to take that down a step in a more detailed fashion to the role. The role determines the groupings of access for each of your end users. Out of the box, CareFinity is installed with two roles, the admin and the end user role that you see displayed here. You may have relabeled these, and if so, that's perfectly fine. There's no right or wrong with that. But out of the box, you received a practice administrator in an end user role. You can have as many roles as you would like to create. Just remember that you are going to manage your user access. That is your clinic's responsibility. So the more roles that you create, the more access you're going to be managing. So again, there's no right or wrong, but that's just a little bit of a tip. You might think, well, I might want 7 or 8 roles, and that's perfectly fine if you need that. Let's set those up and let's configure it. But always be wise. I would recommend less is more and only configuring the specific ones that you need because, again, you're going to be managing that long term with your user access. So the role controls the access that the end user has within the application. So I'm going to open up the end user role just by clicking the pencil to edit that role. The screen is very straightforward. It's divided into 3 different sections. We have the general section, the administrator section, and the patient section. As you might expect for an end user, the administrator section is blank, which makes a lot of sense because in most cases, you don't want the end users having the rights and privileges to change the things that we're reviewing in the application today. Having some general settings and some patient level settings is appropriate for an end user, and that's the settings that you might want to control. So a common example of where additional roles are needed is for view access versus print and export access. You may have a subgrouping of users that you want to have full rights to CareFinity. And by full rights, I mean all of the options that you see here that are basically checked. That gives the end user the ability to print and export documentation from CareFinity, release information. That may be a feature that you want some end users to have, but you may think, well, I really don't want every end user to be able to print and export information from CareFinity. Maybe I only want some end users to have that privilege. Maybe my team leads or specific roles within the organization. And maybe I want most of my end users just to have view-only access to CareFinity. Maybe we're just using it in a downtime event, or We just need to reference it to look up information from a past EHR that we're no longer using, and it's maybe more situational when you're using CareFinity, and you don't want them to have the ability to print and export. How you would control that is through a role. You would create one role that has the ability to print and export, which this user right now does have those rights. You can see print patient data is checked, meaning this user role has that privilege. And you can also see export documents is checked. So I might choose to name this role end user role with print and export. Maybe that makes more sense for my organization. I click save, and now you can see that that has been updated and that has been changed. Maybe I want to create another role from this same idea, but I don't want them to have the print patient data, and I don't want them to have the export documents. And I could say that as well. You can slice and dice this however you would like. You can limit the rights, add the rights, give everybody full privileges. Maybe it makes complete sense for your organization for everybody to have every right because we want to be able to use the system in have all privileges. That's perfectly fine. Again, there is no right or wrong. There is no limit to the number of roles. Please feel free to create as many as you might need. So next we're going to move down to manage users. Again, we're just working from top to bottom in this administration menu because it is designed and set up in the appropriate flow if you were building out your CareFinity or what you might need to change and in which order. Manage users determines user access. This is your logins. These are your access identities for CareFinity. When you first go live on your CareFinity application, your implementation engineer will work with you to create your user logins. Depending on the flavor of CareFinity that you're implementing it and how you choose to deploy it, you may have hundreds of CareFinity users, or you might have 5 or 10, just depending on what you're using CareFinity for in your specific situation. We basically have 3 ways that you can load in your users into CareFinity initially to kind of help get the user build lifted for your organization. The first one is just manually creating users in CareFinity. You click the create user button, go through the fields, create the end user, put a temporary password. The user can then log in. Option number 2 is the implementation engineer can create all of these new logins from a spreadsheet that you provide. If you provide us a spreadsheet, we can use that through SQL, create the logins for you so that you don't have to click this create user button 500 times to create all your users initially. And the third and final option, if you're using CareFinity downtime, we can potentially set up a sync process that will create and disable the users in CareFinity when users are created and disabled in your source EHR. Now, this option is only available with select EHRs because only certain EHRs allow us the technology to receive those messages and be able to monitor those activities in the source application to be able to replicate that in CareFinity. So if you're interested in setting up that sync process where your users will be enabled and disabled as they are in the EHR application, so you don't necessarily have to manage that as tightly on the CareFinity side of things, please check with your CareFinity implementation engineer and we can give you the final word, the yes or no, if your source EHR will allow for that. So a variety of ways to create end users in CareFinity. One of the key takeaways from today is important to understand that you have to have at least one clinic administrator allows for someone to be responsible for managing these settings that we're reviewing today and also enabling and disabling users as needed within the practice. So as I mentioned before, your organization will manage your end users, your roles, and your end users. And so as users need password resets, as MFA changes, people get new phones, things like that, that will all be managed by your team through whoever is assigned the admin access so that they can get to this menu and have the rights and privileges that are contained here. And then all your other users would either be end users or additional roles that you've created and assigned out appropriately. So to walk through creating an end user, I'm going to click the Create User button. Your EHR username links to your source EHR and allows you to look up the user based on their username in the source EHR. So if I were to look up my name, I can see that I am an active user in the source EHR, so I can pick that user. And now you'll see that the information that was populated in the source EHR defaults into CareFinity as a courtesy, so you don't have to key all of that in. The username or login name, first and last name, of course, would be the same as what is configured in the source EHR. Everything that has a red asterisk is a required field, so we want to make sure that we fill out at least those components. So the role would be any roles that you configured in the manage roles step before. I'm going to say we want this person to be an end user. If you want to populate email and cell phone, you can, but the only required fields are the password and confirm password. So I'm just going to type in a password here. Make sure it matches. Oh, it doesn't match. It's okay. I'm not going to save this. But we want to allow password change. And we also want to force password change so that the first time that they log in, they're prompted to reset this from the password that we initially provided to them so that the end user is the only person that knows the password that they're using in CareFinity. Now, let's say you're using a flavor of CareFinity where you're not actively connected to a source EHR to do the search that I showed you above. Maybe you're using CareFinity in the context of I have a past EHR that I still need to access for medical records and release of information, but I've already moved on to a different EHR and CareFinity is housing that more historical type information for me. Well, in that instance, I can check mark the no EHR user. What that tells CareFinity is that you do not have a username to populate in this first field, and we don't have anything to connect to pull in that information from the source EHR because there is no connectivity there. We're storing the historical or the archived information. So the no EHR user will allow me to bypass connecting that in and doing that search if needed. Then once you save it, your user is created. You can let the end user know their login name, their temporary password, and they can go ahead and work to log in to the CareFinity application. Let's say, for example, an end user calls and they need their password reset. You would locate the end user in the list of users here listed in the application. You can search on any combination or a single field from login name, last name, and first name. So I'm going to look for Ray because he needs his password reset. This is who I'm looking for here. So I'm going to click the edit, the pencil icon, and I'm going to reset Ray's password. So I'm going to check mark the reset password box and type in a password and confirm password and click save and provide that new information to Ray. That would be the steps to reset a password. Now, let's say it's 6 months down the road and Ray is no longer at our organization. He has moved on. I can simply click the delete button to deactivate that user and delete their rights to log into the CareFinity application. This last or third icon that you see here on the right-hand side indicates your MFA, your multi-factor authentication. If it's gray, as you see in my demo system here, that indicates that MFA is not enabled for that user. If it is green, that indicates that the user has set up their MFA and it's currently active. So you can kind of quickly tell if you need to look or do an audit, browse through your users, you can see who's logged in, who set up their MFA. They'll be prompted to go through the steps and set that up. There is a possible fourth icon that you might have out to the right-hand side here, which is a lock icon. If the user has tried their login password combination too many times, CareFinity will lock their user access for security purposes, and they will have to contact their local clinic administrator to unlock that. So if Ray gives you a call and is like, I think I locked my account, all you have to do is come in here to the Manage Users, click the lock icon, and let Ray try again. Clicking the lock icon will unlock their CareFinity account so that they can try to log in again. So once you've set up all your end users, you set up your roles, you attach the role to the end user, make sure everybody's in the appropriate role or grouping, has the right permissions, everything's set up exactly like you want. You want to confirm that all of your users have an account and that everyone is attached to the correct role and has the appropriate security, and then we can start letting end users log in. So the next area that we're going to move to look at is manage user practices. Manage user practices is only used if you have multiple practices and want to restrict access to practices by user login. By default, administrators have access to all practices, and new users are configured under a single practice. So if you have multiple practices that you want users to have access to, this is where you would come to grant those additional rights to each individual user. Let's say you only have one practice, you would never need to come into the Manage User Practice menu. If typically your users work in the same practice all the time and they don't really travel or float practice to practice, then you may never need to come into this menu either. This menu again is if you have multiple practices and a single user needs access to multiple practices in CareFinity. So the way that we would do that is you would find the end user and then you click the map icon out to the right hand side. All of the available practices would be listed on the left, and the practices that you would like for the end user to have rights to, you can use the single arrow to move them to the right. Or if you want this user to have every practice in your organization, the double arrow would move everything to the right. But kind of the key takeaway is whatever's on the right-hand side is what the user is going to have access to from the practices that you have available. Click Save, have your user log out and log back in, and they should see those additional practices available to them. Manage report categories. Every practice will have at least one and up to 3 report categories configured in this area of your CareFinity application. This area of the application ties report categories to roles that can run and view these groupings of reports. So really what I would like to highlight here for the practice administrators is the edit feature. This is going to be set up by your CareFinity implementation engineer, and really there should not be a need for a clinic administrator to create a report category or try to build this out, but you might want to edit and adjust who has access to these groups. So for example, the security report, I just clicked the pencil icon to open up this menu. The security report is created for every practice and automatically assigned to the administrator role. And what that means is that only administrators will have rights to any reports in this grouping. This is the report category, so this is the higher level in the hierarchy. So only the administrators right now will have rights to any reports assigned to the security reports report category. If you would like to adjust that for your practice, you can edit those privileges here. So let's say, for example, back when we were working on the roles, you created a team lead role that you wanted. Maybe that team lead, you want to have like a combination of end user and administrative privileges. Maybe not everything an administrator has, but you want them to have some of those privileges so that everything doesn't fall to you to edit or manage in CareFinity. What you could do is check mark that additional role here and give that team lead or even your end users, if you wanted to, rights to this report category. When I click save, it's going to give privileges to all reports tied to this security reports category to both your end user and your administrators or any other roles that you check. So this is how you can give additional rights to anyone that you would like at the role level within your organization. Manage reports is the next section of the administrative build that we'd like to look at today. This area of the application is where reports are configured and attached to a report category, what we just looked at, by your CareFinity implementation engineer. Editing this menu could cause your reports to stop working. So if you see anything that you feel like is not right or you might like to change, please be sure and log a ticket for those items so we can make sure we adjust that appropriately and we don't ever lose access or the ability to run and generate your reports. This is really more of a reference for the administrators to be able to see specific reports and what report category they're tied to. You might have been thinking when we were back looking at the report category, well, how do I know what security reports are in this report category? Well, that's where we see it is here in the manage reports. I can see that I only have one report, the audit log report, in the security reports. So if I give rights at the report category level, at this point in time, I'm only giving rights to one report. Now remember, when you give those category reports, that could change if more reports are added into your system. But as of today, it would just be the one. So report categories control the access through roles and can be edited in the manage report categories as needed. And then the manage reports gives us a glimpse into what are we giving people rights to and allows you to review the content or the specific reports so you can determine if you want to grant access. You may have a user that says, I really want to see the insurance balance report, and they don't have rights to the financial reports category, but maybe you don't want to give them rights to these other two groupings. So that would be a decision, that you would make as an administrator. Manage notes. Manage notes is used to build and configure note templates that allow each practice to create predefined forms that end users can complete on a patient by patient basis. The notes created on patient records are saved into CareFinity, and if configured, they can push back into the source EHR once connectivity is restored. We have a separate training on the manage notes area. So if you would like to know more about building out these note templates, please log a ticket with us. We would be happy to send you the link to that training so that you can review it and build as many of these note templates as you would like to build for that could be a value for your organization. And then the last menu for today is the patient archive. The patient archive is a menu that's only present in a CareFinity Live Archive deployment. So if you do not see this menu option, that most likely means you do not have a CareFinity Live Archive implementation. You would probably have or be logged into a CareFinity downtime or maybe a CareFinity archive implementation. This menu offers a search option to search for archived patients. So if I wanted to come in here and look for a patient, I could certainly come in here and look for some. I'm going to look for my patient blue-green, and I'm going to search, and just based on the criteria, there's the patient that I was looking for, blue-green. So what it's doing here is it's searching records or patient records that have been archived from your source EHR application. If you search here and you don't see the patient that you expected to see, That simply means that they have not been archived from your source EHR, or maybe they were archived and has subsequently been restored back, whatever the case may be. You can restore from this menu. The restore icon is over on the right-hand side. In this menu, you can restore by searching for the name, or if you have the patient pulled up in CareFinity and maybe you were doing other work here as well, you can restore directly from the patient record in CareFinity. So you do not have to be an administrator to perform the restore functions as long as your role has the appropriate security privileges to do so. The archive settings are your current settings for your live archive. And again, this is an area you would not want to edit without discussing more with your implementation engineer or someone from the care team at MTS. But if you ever wondered, what was my archive setting? What was my time frame? What do I have configured? You could come here and get a little bit of a sneak peek. And of course, if all the content that you're looking for, or maybe a specific setting, is not present here, a quick ticket to your implementation engineer at MTS, we'd be happy to get that information for you. And then finally, something that we really don't have a menu for under administration, but I want to make sure everyone is aware of it, is in the new CareFinity application, the upgraded CareFinity 4.0 or 4.1, which everyone should be on at this point. Every practice receives 3 custom demographic fields that can be configured. And where we're going to see that information is here on the right-hand side, and we're specifically looking at this little toggle icon in the top right-hand corner. So when you open a record in CareFinity, other information is automatically going to display your insurance, your pharmacy name, your pharmacy phone. But your organization has the opportunity to link into CareFinity 3 custom demographic fields of your choosing, and you can see those by clicking the toggle icon in the top right-hand corner. Now, just as an example, we've loaded preferred pronouns so that you can see how that would look, and you can have up to 3 different fields here. If you would like to have additional options, you could have a second and you could have a third present in this menu if that's of interest to you. You do not have to configure these. You can leave that blank. You can configure 1 or 2 and not the third. It's really your discretion. We just wanted to add those fields along with your latest CareFinity upgrade to enhance CareFinity and give you opportunity to link in fields that could be beneficial for your organization. If you didn't know about that feature and you're like, yes, I would love to link a couple of fields up, please just log a ticket. We'd be happy to get back with you and get that set up in your CareFinity application. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure going through the administrative features of CareFinity with you. If at any time we can be of assistance to your organization, please never hesitate to reach out. You can email us at support@medtechsolutions.com. That will log a ticket in our ticketing system, or if you have a more pressing need, please feel free to call us. We are here Monday through Friday and would love to talk more with you and help in any way we can.